Pakistan as a soft power receiver. So how all that is perceived in Pakistan? And I believe that for you, it's hilarious. An academic from the West telling you how to receive China, but I will try to explain how I see it, and I will try to rely on data. So when we talk about soft power receivers in Pakistan, aligned with Joseph Nair conceptualization, I distinguished Pakistan's government and Pakistani public. Since I've got not a lot of time, I will touch upon only about central government perspective on the CPEC and related Beijing performance. And we all know that central government, regardless who is in power, spreads game-changer narrative. So it appears that Chinese or Beijing in particular won hearts and minds of the government, of the people who work for the government in Islamabad. Well, with local governments, it's a bit more complicated. It requires more time to discuss. When it comes to Pakistan Republic, it appears that Pakistanis are one of the greatest enthusiasts of China in the world. At least peer research data suggests so. In some years, only Chinese were more enthusiastic about China in the world, comparing with Pakistani public. Nevertheless, the last data about Pakistani public approach to China were gathered in 2015, and like previous speaker said, a lot has changed since then. In 2018, Gallup conducted a survey about how Pakistanis perceive the CPEC. It's a pity that you cannot see that on my screen, so I will simply read the numbers. It appears that 59% of respondents in Pakistan recognize the CPEC as very beneficial for the country. 16% of them claim that it is beneficial. Also, over 50% of Pakistani respondents said that CPEC is good for Pakistan's development. So, relying on that data, we may claim that China is successful in winning Pakistanis' hearts and minds with the CPEC. Yet, there are some issues that these numbers do not cover. For instance, we do not have any data breaking by the province, so we do not know how particular provinces see the CPEC, and it can heavily impact China's soft power vis-a-vis particular parts of the country. And since I'm running out of time, here I would like to pause and thank for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Agnieszka. Our next speaker for today is Dr. Sheikh Waleed Rasool. Dr. Sheikh Waleed Rasool is Director of South Asia Institute of Multi-Track Dialogue Development and Diplomatic Studies. Dr. Rasool today is going to talk about CPEC, the road to peace and inquiry through connectivity, interdependence and globalization.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There is a difference between writers, columnists, and historians. They live in nostalgia. And The scholars and thinkers think the futuristic approach. This is the difference, main difference, when you have to architect future of your nation.
The Trump administration, when U.S.-China relations plunged to their worst low in many years. Accordingly, the Biden administration's policy towards CPEC will also be shaped by U.S.-China rivalry. Though President Biden has indicated a desire to seek cooperation with Beijing where possible, the U.S.-China relationship is bound to remain tense for the foreseeable future. The rivalry is here to stay for the long haul. And this suggests that U.S. views of CPEC are unlikely to soften in a big way in the Biden era. So let me just get into a few thoughts on those sort of broad overarching statements. Contrary to what some may believe, Washington has not been consistently opposed to CPEC. During the project's first few years, U.S. officials perceived it in a way that Islamabad and Beijing would like Washington and the wider world to see it today. A promising project that could deliver major benefits to Pakistan's economic development and contribute to its broader prosperity. So let's go back to October 2017, more than 4 years ago. A State Department official said in a lengthy statement that, and I quote, CPEC, and particularly its focus on transportation infrastructure and energy development, has the potential to contribute to stability and prosperity in Pakistan and the region. The U.S. welcomes any development projects that benefit the Pakistani people, unquote. It's remarkable, given what we've heard in more recent years, that you could have a comment that positive from the U.S. government about CPEC. Even more striking were that same State Department official's comments about China in that same comment in October 2017. The official said, quote, "We have a shared interest with China in a stable and prosperous Pakistan. China can play an important role in expanding and improving Pakistan's infrastructure and promoting power generation projects." Now, notably, those comments came just a few months after President Trump had hosted Chinese President Xi for a 2-day summit. Soon thereafter, Trump would say that the U.S.-China relationship was enjoying, quote, tremendous progress. Now, several months after that, Pakistani media reports claimed that then U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan, David Hale, had lamented during the discussion that the U.S. had not been invited to join CPEC. So again, remarkable, this degree of receptivity from the U.S. government in those days to CPEC. But there were, even back then, at the end of 2017, several hints of a darkening U.S. mood on CPEC. One of the first signs came in October 2017, in fact, when then Defense Secretary James Mattis testified on Capitol Hill about the Belt and Road Initiative. He told the Senate Armed Services Committee that BRI, quote, goes through disputed territory, a likely reference to Gilgit-Baltistan or Pakistan's district Kashmir. Mattis added, quote, "I think that in itself shows the vulnerability of trying to establish that sort of a dictate," unquote. So I think that Mattis's comments there were notable not just for being the first public criticism of CPEC by a U.S. official, but also for articulating India's position on BRI at a moment when the U.S.-India relationship was certainly enjoying rapid growth. The second sign of a changing U.S. position on CPEC came in July 2018. It came at a moment when Pakistan's economy was struggling and rumors were rife that a newly elected government would pursue a new bailout plan from the IMF. Secretary of State Pompeo at the time warned the IMF not to provide bailout funds to nations receiving Chinese loans. Quoting Pompeo, "There's no rationale for IMF tax dollars and associated with that American dollars that are part of the IMF funding to bail out Chinese bondholders," unquote. Now, given the sizable number of CPEC-related Chinese loans that Pakistan was taking on back then, Pompeo's threat appeared to be directed at CPEC. Then in 2018, later that year, U.S.-China relations took a major tumble. In March of that year, Washington imposed new tariffs on China. There was a brewing trade war that intensified over that summer. And then in October of 2018, Vice President Mike Pence gave an address that for the first time outlined a more hawkish policy toward Beijing that would really endure for the rest of the Trump era. He said that the U.S. would compete, not cooperate with China. So in 2019, the trade war further intensified. Trump imposed $300 billion in new import tariffs, He designated China as a currency manipulator. So things were getting really bad in the relationship. And it was against this backdrop that Ambassador Alice Wells, the most senior South Asian-focused official at the State Department at the time, in late 2019, she took the stage for a speech at the Wilson Center, where I worked, in November of that year. And I think this has become quite infamous. This audience would know what that speech was about, so I won't go into it, but it was a detailed denunciation of CPEC. And what I would say here is that the first part of the speech, the critique of CPEC, generated the most headlines, especially in Pakistan. But global commentary gave less attention to the second part of Ambassador Wells' speech, which called for more U.S. investment in Pakistan, using a more equitable and sustainable investment approach. And that, I think, brought home the fact that Wells' speech was meant to be a critique of China, not Pakistan. Her framing of U.S. investment in Pakistan as a better alternative to China's amplified how CPEC and more broadly Pakistan had gotten dragged into an ever-worsening U.S.-China rivalry. So 2020 brought more bad news for U.S.-China rivalry. President Trump blamed China for spreading the coronavirus pandemic. U.S. assertions about the illegality of Chinese claims in the South China Sea added to tension as well, and there was so much more. Throughout 2020, U.S. criticism of CPEC continued as well. Alice Wells remained the chief U.S. government critic of the project, reiterating her earlier concerns about, quote, predatory Chinese lending and a lack of transparency. So some observers from the Republican Party had suggested that the Biden administration's China policy would revert to the softer, more conciliatory stance of the Obama administration's, in which many of the current government, including Biden himself, served on senior levels. But I think it's quite clear now, over the 5-6 months that the Biden administration has been in power, that it's not going to be a pushover on China. Much has changed in U.S.-China relations since the Obama years. There's now strong bipartisan support in Washington in favor of taking a strong stand on China. It's notable that many of the top China hands in the Obama administration are described as hawks, not doves, on China. So the Biden administration, like the Trump administration, views Beijing as a strategic threat, particularly because of its continued muscular actions in the South China Sea that threaten the interest of U.S. treaty allies and other key allies in Asia. President Biden, who has pledged to make democracy promotion a major pillar of his foreign policy, he has been and will be critical of Beijing's authoritarianism, its human rights violations, its undemocratic uses of technology. Also, the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific policy, which at its root is a strategy meant to counterbalance China, that's been retained. And the Biden White House, really, from its earliest days in office, has articulated some of the core principles of that policy. What this all suggests is that the Biden administration will continue with the Trump administration policy of opposing CPEC. Many of Alice Wells' criticisms of CPEC from the Trump years will find favor with senior Biden officials who hope to promote abroad the good governance, equality, and transparency that Ambassador Wells had claimed were lacking in CPEC projects. But I do think we can expect some differences. Biden has insisted he'll pursue cooperation with China in areas that make sense, and he cited areas like public health and climate change. You have not heard rhetoric as ugly about China with the Biden administration that you had with the Trump administration. So Biden's policy toward China will be hawkish, but I think it will be softer in tone than Trump's, and that will allow some space for cooperation. So we're unlikely to hear Biden administration officials land-based CPEC with harsh rhetoric. I think it's also unlikely that the Biden administration will threaten to use coercion to undermine CPEC, such as Pompeo's subtle threat to use the IMF as leverage over Pakistan to lead in off CPEC loans. And I think this is especially the case given the geopolitical state of play. Washington, I believe, is keen to cooperate with Islamabad to ensure Pakistani support for U.S. counterterrorism goals and post-withdrawal Afghanistan, especially in terms of allowing U.S. airspace, especially in terms of allowing U.S. aircraft to use Pakistani airspace. So in effect, the Biden administration won't want to risk antagonizing Islamabad by land-basing CPEC. I know I'm running out of time, so I will wrap up in the next minute or so.
Number one. Number two, Europe was in the dark age, and it was two people who appeared the new maritime rules. That's Columbus and Vasco da Gama. The new world began. So when you create the roads like CPEC, it creates an equilibrium, and that equilibrium is required to Pakistan. And number four, when we are differentiating the relations, we have wrote recently a paper published in the Institute of Strategic Studies. You can go the difference between China and India with her neighbors in the power balance. What is the power balance? So when we say we were the partner of the unipolar USA, we were partner CETO, CENTO, war against communism and war against terrorism. We might have got some opportunity in economic perspective, but we failed to resolve our national issue, that was the Kashmir dispute. Because peace is very important. Number two, the states of the status always need to balance. They need a partner, and we did so to be aligned with the USA. So it was our compulsion. Now again, when there is a strategic shift in the unipolar world, and Peter Frampton wrote a book that's called the Silk Rules. And I will recommend all students to go through that book. He gives 23 reasons that power is now shifted from Europe to Asia. So we must keep ready for it to get dividend from it. Because power and geography keeps changing, and you have to adjust yourself with the change. So the road to peace is absolute in your interests. Number third, empirically you have only two methods, the inductive method and the deductive method. That means from simple to complex, from complex to simple. And every research scholar sitting in front of me have to utilize in her or his research these two modules. So when you are seeing that Europe was in the dark age, and they returned power, they were having the four opportunities. Number one, the mercantile era. We failed to adjust with that. Now we got an opportunity from road to peace. Number two, industrial era. We again failed to adjust. And we remained in the isolation. Again, we didn't get the dividend from that power struggle. So number third was science and digital era. Now the strength of the power is that how much SITAM graduates, SITAM means science, technology, engineering and mathematics. How much SITAM graduates Pakistan universities are producing annually is our power of the struggle. So I have a little time, so 10 minutes if you will give me little more, then I will conclude. But my humble submission is that when you are thinking scholarly and give some input to the current present knowledge, that you have to apply only two methods and you don't have the third method. But the countries which don't balance in the hard power, they need a soft power, and soft power is the requirement of the time for the Pakistan. Number two, when your enemy is so much cunning, and he had launched a drive of Hindutva to digest the whole South Asia, you have to keep yourself on the foot and you need to put your midnight hour to give implicated solutions to the problem. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you, Dr. Rasool. Our next speaker is Dr. Kamran Naseem. Dr. Kamran Naseem is head of
2016, the government and its institutions fully utilized social media to frame China-Pakistan economic corridor as a game changer, as something that can totally transform Pakistan's socio-economic and political destiny. But this euphoria was quite short-lived. Within 3 years, starting specifically in July 2018, this euphoria transformed what we call as CPEC pragmatism or CPEC skepticism. I would explain to you what is CPEC pragmatism and what is CPEC skepticism, but there was certainly a transformation. Mainly because when we embarked on this journey for CPEC, we were beating the drum so high that it attracted unnecessary attention from those who saw the rise of China, Belt and Road initiatives, and China-Pakistan economic corridor as an attempt to challenge the unipolar world order that we witnessed after the Cold War. So, you know, when Donald Trump was the president and he was leaving office, his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he went on a shuttle diplomacy visiting different parts of Central and South Asia and giving one simple message to the Central and South Asian states on BRI, that whether you are with us or against us. In Central Asia, number of countries, they succumbed to American pressure, and so was the case with Pakistan as well. In July 2018, when Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf government assumed office, we have to admit that CPEC was scaled down. The progress on China-Pakistan economic corridor was not as fast as we have witnessed during the last 3 years. What were the reasons? There are 5 factors that we can have to understand the scaling down of China-Pakistan economic corridor, this change of narrative on CPEC, because yes, there was a change of narrative when PTI government assumed office. Empirically speaking, in the 2018-2019, the word CPEC almost disappeared from the narrative in social media, from the mainstream media narrative as well. So what caused this shift? How we transformed from being enthusiastic about CPEC to being skeptic about CPEC? There are 5 factors. Firstly, when PTI government took office, they wanted to rein in the huge capital spending that were incurred by the previous government, and PTI government thought that it is important to stop this huge capital spending to ensure the balance of payment. Because they thought by purchasing a lot of machinery and spending a lot on the infrastructure development, the trade deficit has increased, the balance of payment has been damaged. So it is important that we stop spending too much on mega developmental projects. Secondly, the second factor that contributed in the slowing down of CPEC, to be specific in 2018, was because a few years before global pandemic COVID-19, Chinese economy was also facing a slowdown. If you look at the patterns of Chinese global investment in different parts of the world, we witnessed that in 2018, in the 60 countries where China was spending huge amount of money, there was a 13% decline in the Chinese investment because of the economic slowdown that they faced there before the pandemic. And in 2019, there was a 40% decline in the Chinese funded mega developmental projects around the world, specifically in 60 countries. So that was the second reason. The third reason that contributed in changing the narrative contributing in slowing down the CPEC was the threat of extremism and terrorism. Although we have achieved a lot against terrorism, the number of attacks have gone down from 3 attacks a day that we witnessed after 2009. Now we are moving around, 15 to 20 attacks, low intensity attacks in the peripheries of Pakistan. It's quite an achievement, but when we talk about Balochistan, certainly the threat of terrorism persists there. During the last few years, we have seen attacks on Chinese-funded projects by terrorist organizations operating from Balochistan specifically. So that threat also contributed in slowing down scaling back of China-Pakistan economic corridor. And most recent example of one of the, I would say, a high-intensity terrorist attack was in Gansu, when a number of Chinese engineers were killed in a suicide bombing there. Fourthly, it was the bureaucratic hurdles in Pakistan. There was a lot of bureaucracy involved, and I would reserve my comments on the efficiency of Pakistan's bureaucratic system. I usually say when it comes to why things have gone bad in Pakistan, there are two entities which face most of the blame. It's the politicians and then the establishment. But hardly we talk about bureaucracy, how bureaucracy has contributed in moving things from bad to worse. So bureaucratic hurdles also contributed immensely in scaling down the project. What we would do as a government, we created another organization to deal with the previous organization. So you are using more red tape to dealing with the red tape, so that really didn't help. The main point of my argument, that's the elitist perspective, that's the fifth factor that contributed in the scaling down of China-Pakistan economic corridor. I believe, and I wrote that in one of my papers which was published a few months ago, that elite discord on the Pakistan's strategic alignment and Pakistan's strategic realignment in a changing global world order has also contributed in scaling down of China-Pakistan economic corridor. Our governing elite, starting from 1947, has been Western oriented. यही वजह है कि आज इस हॉल में कोई गोरा नहीं बैठा हुआ है, हम सब मजबूर हैं अंग्रेजी में बात करने का. So वो जो एक legacy है, that still prevails. अगर शायद मैंने ये सूट ना पहना होता तो आप मुझे स्कॉलर भी ना समझते. और ये चीजें हैं जो Pakistan, and we are jealously guarding this colonial legacy in our state, and especially society is not as pro-Western as you see the governing elite of Pakistan. There is hundreds of years of British imperialism in this part of the world. The legacy persists, and even after 1947, our founding fathers, for a number of reasons, they aligned with the United States of America. And from 1947 onwards, we continued to toe the American line. We protected American global hegemony on critical occasions. Firstly, when the challenge came from Soviet Union in Afghan jihad, we were on the vanguard to fight the American war against the socialist Soviet Union. But there was one time in 1970s when Pakistan tried to realign itself, not with the American camp, but with the alternative bloc. And of course, Ali Bhutto was a chief architect of this realignment. But then we saw that he had to pay with his life for this so-called strategic realignment in the country. So the Western influence in the governing elite of Pakistan continues to hold sway. It is an entrenched governing elite that is relevant since 1947, that will remain relevant for decades to come, and since their material and ideational interests lie with the West in general and the United States of America in particular, it's hardly unlikely that we see an actual strategic realignment of Pakistan from west to east. This is something that would continue to do that. Even last week there was an in-camera briefing in the parliament, and there were two perspectives to that, whether we should continue to align with the United States of America or explore other options. Well, it's not really easy to antagonize United States of America, and there are a number of reasons for that. But I think during the last 4 years, when to appease United States of America, to allay their fears about CPEC, we did scale down the CPEC, anticipating that United States of America would offer political, diplomatic, and financial assistance to Pakistan. But unfortunately, during the last 3 years, आपको सिवाय अमेरिका से तिफल तसल्लियों के कुछ नहीं मिला है. They do not have the financial muscle to contribute, and most importantly, at the moment, the United States of America is obsessed with countering China. And to counter China, I've got the two checks, I have to conclude it right away. So to counter China, the United States of America thinks that India is the linchpin to counter China. And the United States of America can hardly afford to engage with Pakistan at the cost of India, because they need India to contain China. So when there is no optimism, when we have failed to extract maximum benefits for Pakistan from America, I think this is high time that our governing elite recalibrate Pakistan's strategic orientation. We review and reconsider where we have been, standing during the last 70 years, and what Pakistan का मुस्तकबिल है कहाँ. मेरा ख्याल है कि इसमें हमारी गवर्निंग एलीट एक बहुत अहम किरदार अदा करेगी. There is a difference of opinion in the governing elite of Pakistan. And just to conclude, it could be a double-edged sword for CPEC. There is a Western-oriented elite that would try to strike balance between America and China, so we can assume that can extract maximum benefits for Pakistan. But unfortunately, that has not happened as of yet, and I think expecting from America that America would come to help us politically, diplomatically, financially, is hoping against the hope. अगर अमेरिका सिंसियर होता तो हम पिछले 2-3 साल से फेड ऑफ में धक्के ना उठा रहे होते. So they have given a clear message, and I think we need to reach out.
Thank you. Our next presentation will be online with Dr. Ania. Her topic is, can the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor help Beijing win Pakistanis' hearts and minds, reviewing Chinese soft power strategies vis-a-vis Pakistan.
Good morning, everyone from Warsaw, Poland. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this conference.
A leading foreign investor in Pakistan, but in post-CPEC scenario, China has left the US behind. So the significance of CPEC is also for this region. I shall not go in detail, but remember that it's junction of many corridors, and it will also accelerate economic activities. Now I shall focus on CPEC projects in Hazara. So remember that under CPEC, there are 3 main projects in Hazara region. So Hazara is part of KPK, and it consists of 8 districts. I shall not go in detail. So Hazara has its history, and historically the traders have used this route. So first of all, I shall concentrate on high-port dry port. Remember that dry port play a very important role in the boosting of trade of any area of the world. So it will boost the trade, it will manage trade traffic between China and Pakistan, and it will also create employment opportunities, and there are certain other benefits of this port, but I shall not go in detail. So the next project is Hazara Motorway. So it is also key component of CPEC, and it is also taken as M15 motorway, and its length is 180 kilometers, and it connects Punjab with the KPK province, and it is considered as a milestone in the uplifting of the
Hazara region, and also it is also time saving, and it will also encourage the tourism industry in Pakistan and particularly in that area. The third project is Suki Kinari power project that is situated in Mansela, and it is estimated that it will generate 870 megawatt electricity and it also provide jobs for more than 4,000 people. So now I come to the conclusion. My conclusion is that the projects that have been designed for Hazara, it will change the dynamics of Hazara region. It is beneficial for the population of that area, and it will also alleviate the sense of deprivation, and it will also encourage tourism industry in Pakistan. Thank you, yes, topic.
Thank you. Finally, we have a recorded session with Mr. Mike.
You cannot put dismissive to what they are saying. और हर इस मुल्क में खल्क तजर्बा है इस तरह की परिस्थिति. So the keynote, Mr. Rafiullah was, he is Director of Planning and Reform, and he is exclusively looking at the CPEC, actually in Balochistan, and he is from Balochistan as well. He discussed that, for example, what takes and the CPEC or development बात करते हैं. Maybe here by road पे करते हैं. There are many changes taking place, not only Balochistan but Fata everywhere, for Fata. लेकिन I think there is nothing exception coming from CPEC there. ठीक है. आप देखें कि गवर्नमेंट को बिजली कहाँ से आ रही है? ईरान से. अफराद को कहाँ से आ रही है? ईरान से. So you see, even if using 20,000 megawatt electricity from the project, funded by CPEC, but if these are not, delivered to Balochistan, then they are not benefiting from it. So I think the current reality is that they are not benefiting much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Rizwan wants to make a comment, please.
I just wanted to say one thing. I think I think the difference of narrative. One is saying the difference of perspective is basic human needs. I'm not talking about industrialization, being wrong, which will have impact on the long term. I believe. But I think if
I personally agree with you जब आप बातें मैं आपसे agree नहीं करता हूँ. देखिए ये CPEC का जो मेरा व्यू पॉइंट है, चले पहले आप बात करें ना, फिर बात करता हूँ मैं. पब्लिक डिमांड के आपको ज्यादा बहुत ज्यादा है.
बात की कि वहाँ जगह बन रही है. सर माइंड मत कर, वहाँ तो जगह बहुत बन रही है, मगर एक ही बता जो वहाँ जो रह रहे वो क्या परेशान क्या अपनी लोग. उसके साथ ही सर अभी आपने एक बात की कि वहाँ चीजें बन रही है. 72-74 साल हुए सर. 1952 में वहाँ से केस नहीं किए सर. मेरे इलाके में अभी तक केस नहीं है सर. अभी आप सर ने कहा कि वहाँ चीजें बन रही, ठीक है बन रही है सर. सर आपका मेट्रो पर हर चीज पंजाब में बन रही है. सीपेक मेरे इलाके से स्टार्ट हो रहा है, तो सबसे पहले मुझे आके
Please keep going. Please silence, थोड़ा सा सुनिए।
और आगे सर जो चाइना और अमेरिका की जो दुश्मनी है उसके इम्पैक्ट क्या होंगे पाकिस्तान के ऊपर। हम पहले भी रशिया के साथ जंग लड़ चुके हैं और उसके अलावा अफगानिस्तान में 20 साल तक जंग लड़ते रहे। तो सर क्या हम अमेरिका की दुश्मनी अफोर्ड कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि हम आई नो चाइना इज ग्रोइंग पावर बट वी कांट इग्नोर अमेरिका।
किससे सवाल है? अच्छा
Okay, let's start from Russia. हमने एक साइड ली, let me be very clear. हमने रशिया में आने से रोका, ऐसे ही हुआ। मेरे लाइफ टाइम के अंदर मेरी होश हवास के अंदर, आई फ्रॉम इस्लामाबाद, ICB से पढ़ा हूँ, मेरी होश के अंदर यहाँ पे अफगानिस्तान के लोग यहाँ पे आके जुमा बाजार लगाते थे और सारा कुछ करते थे, ठीक है, व्हाट हैपेंड? उसके बाद हमने उनको हराया, जैसे भी पीछे कर दिया। जैसे आज हम खुद कह रहे हैं सेंट्रल एशियन स्टेट्स इधर से आ जाए, रशिया इधर से आ जाए, दिस इज व्हाट इज प्रैक्टिकली हैपनिंग। हम एक साइड गए, वहां से मुस्लिम बना, दूसरी साइड RCD बनाओ, तो ये बनाओ, तो वो बनाओ। इधर से किसी ने बात की थी अभी कि चाइना से और क्या हो रहा है, तो भाई आपको कोई चीज दे ही नहीं रहा, आप कहां से चीजें खरीदेंगे? मिलिट्री हार्डवेयर चाहिए, नोबडी इज गिविंग यू। जब तक वहां से ठप्पा नहीं लगता आपको वो चीज नहीं मिलती। दिस इज द रियलिटी। वी डोंट वांट टू बी एनीबॉडीज साइड, वी हैव टू रिमेन न्यूट्रल। दिस इज द मोस्ट डिफिकल्ट थिंग, टू रिमेन न्यूट्रल। कैसे रहें न्यूट्रल? किसी से बात करें, वो कहते हैं कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर साहब ने तोहफा ने जवाब नहीं दिया, तो इंडिया ने ये कर दिया, तो अमेरिका ने ये कर दिया, इंडिया ईरान ने ये कर दिया, कैसे जवाब दें? ईरान के साथ अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बात हो रही थी कि IP पाइपलाइन आधी बन के आगे रहेगी, और भाई इसके ऊपर तो सैंक्शन लगी थी, आप वहां से तेल नहीं ले सकते। क्यों सर बिजली आ रही है वहां से, CPEC से बिजली क्यों नहीं जा रही बलूचिस्तान के अंदर? क्यों? क्योंकि कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव नहीं, कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव नहीं होगा तो नाम आप कैसे चलेगा? नोबडी इज राइट। आज वो उन्होंने कह ही दिया कि मुझे फोन नहीं आया, तो भाई ये US प्रेसिडेंट, ठीक है ना, मैं इंतजार करता रहूंगा, आई विल नॉट वेट, व्हाई वी शुड वेट? इतना बड़ा पाकिस्तान है, 22 करोड़ लोग, हमें जरूरत नहीं है भाई, वी आर सेल्फ सफिशिएंट, हम खुद बना सकते हैं। व्हाट वी हैव डन इन लास्ट 6 इयर्स, हमें कोई जवाब नहीं दे रहा था PMS से, इस तरीके चाइना 6 नए जहाज इस महीने में कमीशन हुआ। वी वर नॉट हैविंग स्मॉल बोट्स, कहां से लेंगे? नहीं कोई दे रहा, खुद बना के उनको डाल दिया पानी में। वी आर डूइंग द लॉ एनफोर्समेंट विद रिस्पेक्ट टू दैट। हां, इंजन हमने लिए, यस, जवान, उसके अलावा कोई ऑप्शन नहीं। जहां का इंजन यहाँ पे मैं कहूँ फैसल इंजन बन गया, फैसल इंजन तो नहीं बन रहा ना, क्या करें? कोई लड़ाई नहीं किसी से। वी हैव टू फोकस टुवर्ड्स आवर ओन पीपल। पाकिस्तान सबसे पहले मुशर्रफ साहब भी यही कहते थे, हाथ यही कहता था, अब हम भी यही कहते हैं, उसे ऐसे नहीं, ठीक है? तो वी आर नॉट ऑन एनीबॉडीज साइड। थैंक यू फैसल।
आखिरी के अफगानिस्तान के हवाले से तो हमने 40 साल से 30 लाख से 50 लाख रिफ्यूजीज को यहाँ रखा, उनके बच्चों को पढ़ाया, और जब वो वापस चले गए, they have played a constructive role in the rebuilding of Afghanistan. I hope travel through Afghanistan, Kabul, Balkis, मज़ार शरीफ में, इनके गांव में गया हूँ, वहाँ पे लोग हैं, they respect पाकिस्तान, वो पाकिस्तान को अपना मुहसिन समझते हैं, उनकी जनरेशन पाकिस्तान को अपना मुहसिन समझते हैं। ये मैं सियासत की वानों की बात नहीं कर रहा, जो गांव में रूरल एरिया में लोग रहते हैं। और इसके साथ साथ हम देखते हैं कि हमने कोई गलत फैसला नहीं किया था। 71 में USSR और इंडिया की फ्रेंडशिप ट्रीटी के नतीजे में ईस्ट पाकिस्तान बांग्लादेश बन गया था। वही सात और कम तक आ गया था, इसलिए हमने नेशनल सिक्योरिटी के हवाले से बात की। दूसरी ये है कि हमने 20 साल तक वार और टेरर में एलाई रहे यूएसए के, हमने क्या नहीं किया, वादा कहाँ से लाऊं तेरे दिल को जो डुबाए, तो हमने क्या नहीं किया, और जो है कितना हमारा खर्चा हुआ, $150 बिलियन, 80,000 पाकिस्तानी शहीद हुए, एलाई ने अपना हक अदा किया और कितना इकोनॉमिक एड हमें मिला। साथ जो है हम देखते हैं कि चीन की जो हमारे साथ सीपेक की अंडरस्टैंडिंग है, that is based on 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, जबकि हम हर रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी प्रोजेक्ट को वेलकम करते हैं, खासा 1000 हो, टेपी हो, सीपेक हो, पीआरआई हो, लेकिन हम ये भी देखते हैं कि कंडीशनलिटीज तो नहीं है, स्ट्रेंथ तो नहीं है। अगर B3W के साथ स्ट्रेंथ है, अगर वो चाहते हैं कि आप सीपेक से हट जाएं, पीआरआई से अलग हो जाएं, तो हम 100 बार सोचेंगे साइन करने से पहले, लेकिन चूंकि हमने फैसला कर लिया है कि वी आर पार्टनर इन पीस। थैंक यू।
जो ऑर्गेनाइजर भी कह रहे हैं कि टाइम खत्म हो गया और टाइम लंच का है, तो आप रेजोल्यूशन कोर्स देख के मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लगा। मैं एक शेयर करता हूँ कि खुदा मुझे किसी तूफान से आशना करते कि मेरे पैर की बोझों में इस्तिराब नहीं, लेकिन यहाँ पे मेरा खुशी हुई जाती बोझों में इस्तिराब हो सकता है। अच्छा, ये मैं आपको एक और क्लैरिफिकेशन दे दूँ। वी सिटिंग हियर आर नॉट government representatives. We are academics, we are researchers like you. Noted scholars बैठे हैं, ये scholars हैं, they have eye on the future of health. आपसे ज़्यादा आप तो बोलते हैं, हम उसका की ऐसी फॉर्म्स बोलते हैं इंस्टीट्यूशन के ऊपर कि ये क्या हो रहा है। देखिए मायूसी, मैं डिबेट के हाथ में हूँ, इंगेजमेंट का मैंने ये मायूसी किया, देखिए हमारा मुल्क के साथ और दूसरा भी बहुत सारी मिसाइल हैं और जिसको हम मिसाइल में क्या कर रहे हैं, अभी हम डिबेट कर रहे हैं, यहाँ पे आप पॉलिसी फेवर बनेगा और ये रिकमेंडेशन देखने की कोशिश नहीं, एक सी होगी डिबेट एक विल हेल्प। मैं अपनी मैं थोड़े से टॉपिक पे रहूँगा और मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूँगा कि जो है CPEC एंड जियोस्टेटिक डायमेंशन के ऊपर थोड़ी सी बात करते हैं 10 मिनट, और बाकी हम खाने के बाद बात करेंगे बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो गया। But ये आप ये please remember the solution of problem lies in knowing the solution. Solution of the problem lies in knowing the problem. अगर आप प्रॉब्लम जानेंगे तो आप आपका काम है रिसर्चर स्टूडेंट ये है कि आप जानेंगे आप प्रॉब्लम। अभी जब ये हमारा टॉपिक था आज का सेशन का है स्ट्रेटजिक डायमेंशन, और स्ट्रेटजिक डायमेंशन के दो जगह हैं। एक ये है कि एक्सटर्नल प्रॉब्लम्स, एक्सटर्नल फैक्टर्स, जिसमें आप बात करते हैं कि क्वाड बन गया, तो साथी हो रही है, रीजनल साथी हो रही है, इंटरनेशनल साथी हो रही है, and then we have certain things that we need to do. We have to put our house in order to solve. The external geostrategic dimension में मेरी बात कर, I also have congratulations. मेरे साथ खेमों भी बैठे हैं सामने, तो जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है दुनिया में ये परपेचुअल है, you know it. ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट असल से आया है, अलग अलग करता है, कभी अमेरिका चाइना करेगा, कभी अमेरिका रशिया करेगा, कभी सऊदी अरेबिया ईरान करेगा, कभी इंडिया पाकिस्तान करेगा, कभी अफगानिस्तान पाकिस्तान करेगा। This is perpetual conflict, is perpetual in international affairs, it will continue, it has continued for a long time and it will continue forever. This is my humble assessment. What to do? करना हमें यह है कि हम आप जैसे लोग रिसर्च करें, आप जैसे लोग मैथमेटिक्स साइंस करें, आप जैसे लोग दूसरे लोग कहते हैं तो ये रिसर्च करें और ऐसे करें कि हमने इसका वर्ल्ड में अपने मुल्क के मफादात का पर्पस कैसे, दैट इज सेकंड। चाइना का है जो चाइना से रिसर्च से आई हैव फ्यू ऑब्जर्वेशन जो मैं आपको चाहता हूँ जो चाइना के काम करें, प्लीज हम कहते हैं नो योर एनिमी, बट मैं कहता हूँ नो योर फ्रेंड। आपको ये पता होना चाहिए तीन दफा सर्व किया पाकिस्तान. I can tell you the exact amount of changes which have happened. There was a port money, it is operational, officially closed up transfer. It can be used in all body facilities. It is a strategic item which we have over there. उसकी वजह से लोग डिसलोकेट हुए, उनको दूसरी जगह दी गई, पूरी न्यूटन हाउसेज स्कीम बनी, which is there in place, आप अपनी आंखों से देख सकते हैं. ठीक है, that will be very clear. ऐसा नहीं है. वहाँ पे डैम्स बने, वहाँ पे बहुत सारे ऐसे एरियाज हैं जिसको गवर्नमेंट ने खुद डेवलप किया, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ बलोचिस्तान ने डेवलप किया, बड़े गवर्नमेंट ने डेवलप किया. हमारी आंखों के सामने ऐसा नहीं. मैं कोयटा में रहा 1 साल के लिए. I have seen the changes over there as well. Currently, my units are deployed in that area. कोई ऐसा इशू नहीं है. बहुत सारी डेवलपमेंट हो रही है, कनेक्टिविटी हो रही है. जो 2005 में मैं अगर बात करूं, जब मोबाइल फोन आपके किसी लेवल पे चलता था, अब इट इज अवेलेबल एवरीवेयर. ऐसा नहीं है. एक आदमी जो बॉर्डर से पहुंच नहीं सकता था कराची और मेडिकल हेल्प जिसको तकरीबन 36 आवर्स लगते थे, वो अभी 7 घंटे में पहुंच गया. इट इज नॉट लाइक दिस कि छोड़ दिया उसको, ऐसा नहीं है. फिशरीज की बात करें, वहां पे जो प्रोसेसिंग प्लांट्स लगे हैं गवादर में, जेबली में, एक बड़ा फाइन किस्म का वहां पे झींगा मिलता है. ठीक है ना, उर्दू में जो उसको कहते हैं, उसके फिशिंग के उसके प्रोसेसिंग के प्लांट्स लगे हैं स्टेट ऑफ द आर्ट. ऐसा नहीं है कि किसी ने उसको पीछे छोड़ दिया तो ये कर दिया, ऐसा कुछ नहीं. फेडरल गवर्नमेंट जितनी सपोर्ट कर सकती है वो कर रही है. लॉ एनफोर्समेंट एजेंसी जो सपोर्ट कर सकती है वो कर रही है. तो ये आप अपने ब्रेन से निकाल दें. मतलब इतना है नहीं तो अच्छा एक this is not going on.